to my channel. Today I'd like to focus on a very important aspect of our paper 2 writing, and that is the introduction to poetry for grade 10 and 11 English home language level. We need to focus on the technical aspects that have to be incorporated whenever going through your poems. There are a few basic ones that I will focus on. However, we need to note that these are not exhausted, as there are so many other pieces to poetry that we need to understand. But today we're going to try and keep it as simple as we can. We can even go into the work that I have prepared for today. We need to focus on the objectives of this video. What is expected of you once the video has been completed. The purpose of this video is to assist not only the grade 12s in eliminating common errors found in the NSC exam. This is a report given back from the 2023 National Senior Certificate for paper 2, but it's also to assist the grade 10s and 11s in understanding their poetry just a little better. Another objective is to help learners from grade 10 to 12 English home language to revise and to understand the important paper 2 concepts, which I have explained previously. This video, lastly, is meant to point out specific issues that keep on appearing every year when we do mark our paper 2 exam scripts that we receive back from our learners. Now, getting into the first aspect that I'd like to focus on today. When reading a poem, the first thing you need to be looking out for is the structure of the poem. This is basically the way that the poet has organized the poem on the page. For example, how many stanzas have they used? The lines that you would find in the stanza, how many are there? You need to check for the breaks in between that indicate that that is the break between each stanza, and or the break between lines. Then you need to consider how the structure of the poem is linked to the poem's meaning. An example is the image that is evident on the slide. We have a difference between the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet as well as the Shakespearean sonnet. This is indicated by the rhyme scheme, by the separation of the stanzas. The structure of the poem is also known as the form. Basically, it's just the parts of the poem, whether it's the stanzas, and that's the small sections of the poem made up into one or more lines separated by stanza breaks. It's also the repetition that gives us the understanding of what kind of structure the poem is following. The purpose of repetition is to strengthen a feeling or an idea. It's also to create a rhythm of sorts, and it develops a sense of urgency in other cases. When we're looking at structure, we also look at the rhyme. What is the rhyme patterns? Which words sound the same? The purpose of this is to help the poem sound more musical or lyrical. Remember that the poem doesn't always have to have a rhyme. And in this case, when it doesn't have a rhyme, we consider it, for example, a free verse poem. But if the poem does have a rhyme, then we need to look at the rhyme scheme. What pattern is followed at the end of each line in the poem? Each end sound is assigned to a specific letter of the alphabet. For example, in a sonnet, it would be A, B, B, A, B, B, A. All right, so the first sentence, or the first line of the poem, would then be assigned the letter A. The purpose of this is that it makes the poem as well a little more lyrical. As we move along, we look at these elements that determine what type of poem it is. So if you've looked at the rhyme, you've looked at whatever structural elements that I've explained in the previous slide, the rhyme scheme, the repetition, those elements will determine the type of poem that it is. It could be a ballad, for example, or a sonnet, or an elegy. So there are different structures that lead to a different kind of poem setting. As we move along, the next concept I would like to put a little bit of emphasis on is the style of the poem. The style is then defined as the manner in which the poet expresses himself or herself. It includes many aspects, but sometimes it helps to just look at the period of time from where the poet had then written the poem. And this will kind of give you an idea of the poet's style. Sometimes it's useful to sum up a poet's style in one word or even more. For example, you could speak about the fact that his style is factual. You'd see that in the kind of words or diction that he's or she's using. It could be an emotive kind of style, appealing to the emotions of the reader. It could be conversational. Maybe that's the style that the poet prefers to follow. So here are a few examples that you could look further into. Remember, these are not examples that are exhausted. You could find other words to or diction to explain or identify the style of the poet. As we move on to the next concept, it is important that we pay attention to diction used. We use the term diction in poetry because we like to pinpoint the kind of words that the poet has used. Remember that a poem is a very concise piece of writing. There isn't much space for a poet to use too many words. Every single word is important. So we need to look at the choice of words that the poet uses, the kind of words and how he or she orders them to suit the purpose or the message of the poem. Words have meaning, and the meaning depends on the kind of context used. So in the use of words, the poet needs to make sure that, or you need to understand why the poet would have chosen the kind of words in that scenario. Remember that words could have same meaning, but in the context of the poem, that word that the poet uses then makes it more relevant to the poem or brings across the message a little better. Diction contributes to creating a certain mood for the reader. For example, if the poet is using formal diction, then you would get to the point that the poem is quite formal. The effects of word choice. Remember that I've just said that different words play different roles as much as they might have the same meaning. We see that they have different connotations, for example, in the poem, and therefore pushing the meaning of the poem just a little more to the desired effect of the poet. I want to look at an example of a rose, for example. And when I'm explaining a rose, remember to contextualize it in the poem. But in this instance, when I speak of the example of the rose, I just want to show you how there is such a big difference in the denotative use of the word as well as the connotative meanings. Remember that denotative is the exact dictionary meaning, while connotations would be the underlying emotive meanings of the word. If we were looking at denotative, the dictionary defines a rose as a prickly bush or shrub that typically bears pink, red, yellow, or white fragrant flowers, native to north temperature regions and widely grown as an ornamental. That is the exact definition of what the flower might be. But when we look at connotations, underlying meanings, we need to look at what a rose connotes too. And this would be, for example, that it symbolizes love, it symbolizes royalty, beauty, sensuality, secrecy, even mysticism. So we can see here that a simple word like this could have completely different meanings that would bring out different attitudes in the type of words used. So you need to make sure that when you go into your exam, you are able to tell the connotations of those words that the poet might have used to express and push through the meaning of poem through specific words used. This is a general comment that I picked up from the 2023 paper 2 marking notes given. A comment was made that a limited vocabulary and an inability to use language appropriately hampers the candidates or the learners' ability to express themselves effectively. So we see here that learners have an issue when it comes to appropriately giving their responses. Make sure that you have a larger vocabulary, and this can be easily improved regularly by making sure that you are reading and understanding words as you go along. So make sure that you build that reading bank of yours. As we move on to the next aspect that I'd like to focus on when it comes to poetry, I'd like you to remember that when a poet has put together this lovely piece that you're able to read, many a times you should be able to pick up the imagery that the poet is trying to convey in the poem. Imagery is thus the language used by poets to create these images in your mind, right? It includes both figurative and metaphorical language, which we'll discuss further a little later. So imagery just involves using more explanation or description or anything that appeals to the senses, your five senses. It conjures up word images or word pictures in your mind. This is how the poet would get this across. Firstly, probably by using emotive language. Emotive language, these affect us emotionally and intellectually, and so when the poet appeals to your emotions, it is easy for this word picture to appear in the reader's mind. Figurative language could be used as well to create imagery. The poet may use metaphors, similes, personifications. When using these, comparisons are made, and these comparisons usually leave you with a word picture that is created in your mind. Sometimes poets also use poetic devices such as sound devices like alliteration, assonance, onomatopoeia. All of these things enhance imagery in the poem. As you think of alliteration and onomatopoeia and all these other devices that I used, make sure that you're able to understand the difference between literal language and figurative language. It so often happens that the learner usually goes towards literal meanings and responds mostly in literal meaning and forgets that there's a figurative aspect to the poetry pieces. Literal language is just saying it exactly the way the poet has said it, while figurative is used to mean something other than what was written, something symbolic, something suggested, or something implied. As we look at the cartoon in front of you, we see the boy with his arms up, eyes wide. He says, "Then he guessed my card and my head literally exploded." And his friend responds, looking obviously a little irked, "If your head literally exploded, it would have actually exploded." That's the literal meaning. It cannot literally explode, or else you wouldn't be standing there in front of him. What you just said was literally figurative. So we need to be able to distinguish between literal language and figurative language. He says literally exploded, but we know that his head has not exploded. Therefore, he was just trying to suggest or symbolically say that his head has exploded. And we know there then that this boy had actually used figurative language. So just be careful about just reading the poem on the surface, especially in the exam, because the main thing we need to always remember is that when you are responding to your poetry or any other kind of literature in your grade 10, 11, and 12 exams, the main thing that should be coming through is the skill. Right? We want to see that you have acquired the skill to respond to the questions at the level that we expect you to. So as a grade 12 learner, you must be able to delve into the figurative language. So move on. We just spoke about literal meaning. We spoke about figurative meaning. I want to look at figures of speech. These are words or phrases that use figurative language. Let's just spend a little more time on that. Language that has meanings that is very different from its actual definition or its literal definition. Right, you should know these common examples. Obviously, again, they are not exhausted here in this video. These are the ones that you've been doing for years on. I know that you know them very well. So just get to know your figures of speech just a little deeper. There are way more than these on the screen. You should know that a simile, comparison using as or like, metaphor, comparison without using the words as or like, personification, we know that it is giving non-human beings human quality. A hyperbole is the art of telling the idea that is meant to be explained by making it larger or smaller. So basically exaggerating this idea that you might be using. So those are our figures of speech. Just make sure that you expand on the ones that your teachers have given you already. We need to focus on the tone of the poem. The tone here, and many confuse tone with mood. So let's just try to understand that the tone here is the attitude that the poet expresses in his writing. So it's coming from the poet's side. For example, the tone of the poem could be happy, it could be optimistic, it could be cheery, it could be angry, it could be... Please make sure you learn many terms, because we find that many of the grade 10s to 11s and 12s usually just like to focus on happy and sad. They need to get the other descriptive words as well. So the tone is the poet's attitude. It is the poet's attitude towards his subject and towards his readers. The tone can only be determined once you have read or examined the whole poem thoroughly. And the tone may also vary within a poem. So it doesn't always have to have the same tone throughout the poem. Sometimes it changes from stanza to stanza. Just make sure that you've read your poem thoroughly in order to understand what the tone is and whether it runs throughout the whole poem. Examples of tone could be the poet being sincere, humorous, forceful, joyful, sentimental, mocking, bitter. These are just a few examples. You could be optimistic or pessimistic. Try to make sure that you build this word bank so that you're not stuck in the exam with just the words happy or sad. As we move on, the next idea when it comes to poetry that I'd like to focus on is the mood. The mood of the poem needs to be established. The mood is just the feeling that the reader gets. So the tone is what the poet expresses to his reader, while the mood is what we as the readers feel when we read the piece of Writing. The feeling that the writer creates for the reader. That's what mood is. This is how the reader is supposed to feel about the subject. Descriptive words, imagery, and figurative language all influence the mood of a literary work. So when you're looking at imagery, it could be something that's harsh or violent or even happy, and these things influence your mood, while descriptive words could be doing the same, as well as figurative language, which we've discussed. Irony is defined as the use of words to convey a meaning that is opposite of its literal meaning. We need to understand these kind of concepts, especially not just for poetry, but also for your literature as well. And if we go a little bit into irony, we know that it is the devices that we use in poems to create some effect that you might want your reader to experience. Here's an example of irony. I can't wait for my detention on Wednesday afternoon. Is that ironic? Surely the child or whoever's going to detention can wait forever, I guess, to go to detention, because I don't think anybody would be excited to go to detention. So that is irony. We need to focus on the theme and the message next. The theme is the lesson or the message of the poem. It is the central idea that we get from the poem or the underlying thought of the poem. We need to always remember that the theme or the message is completely different from the main idea that the poet might be expressing in the poem. I should be able to show you that in a second. So the theme, for example, is the message that you get after reading the poem, right? So it is like your life lesson or the moral of the story after reading your poem, while the main idea is what the story is mostly about. For example, if I was asking you, here's the main idea that we get through the poem. Amari and Catherine are very different, but they are besties. That was the main idea that we got through the poem. But what would then be the theme? We'd find that it's just perfectly fine to be different. It's okay to be different. Another example of a main idea, Anthony got into trouble for making excuses. The theme here would be that actions speak louder than words. So we need to be able to just make sure that we are able to differentiate between what a main idea is and what a theme is. I'd like to move on. As I'm about to close off on this presentation, I'll leave you with a quote that reads, "Poetry, the best words in the best order." This is by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It's important to remember that poets put together a piece, but they only have a specific number of words to. We need to understand that every single word used by the poet serves a purpose and is very important to the piece that was put together. Every word is thoroughly thought out. Right. I'd just like to go through my credits and say that this piece of work was put together with the use of the 2024 English Home Language Roadshow Paper 2 notes from the National Senior Certificate, and I also used a bit of Mr. M. Ackerman's Analyzing Poetry notes. So I am collaborating with quite a few resources to make sure that I deliver the best piece of work that I possibly could for you. I hope that this helps every grade 10, 11, and 12 learner understand poetry just a little bit better so that they're able to analyze it a little better in their exams. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and press on the notification bell so that you can get more notifications on all the other videos that I'll be posting shortly. Thank you very much for watching.